Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I'm your host Matthew Pejkovic and this is episode number 262. Award season is now upon us, which means Talking Oscars is back to cover all things Oscars and awards related due this 2019-2020 awards season. Join me now is film critic, movie analyst and Talking Oscars co-host Shane A. Bassett. Shane, I thank you very much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you, Matt, and here we are again, and lots to talk about tonight. Can't wait.
Very much lots to talk about. I just want to say something first to all the people out there. I apologise. Last week I was really crook, and anyone out there who's got kids, especially younger kids, they bring home all matter of sickness, and I got a double whammy. Start of the week, end of the week. It just came from like all corners. So I had to cancel pretty much every podcast I had scheduled last week because I couldn't talk that well. Well, I'm glad we can do this now and do a real catch-up. And we do have a big show. And I'm sure in that time that we haven't spoke, Shane, you and I, that we've watched quite a bit of movies. So how about we start off with what we watched? And Shane, how about you go first and talk about what films you saw at the flicks?
Well, I've narrowed it down to about 9 or so because I've seen so many since we last spoke. I have seen Ford versus Ferrari, which I really enjoyed. Last Christmas. Now, that's another movie I enjoyed. Now, I know it's getting a bad review, and you might want to comment on it later, but, you know, to me, if it's a Christmas movie and it's a chick flick, I'm partial to both of them. And it does have its flaws, but I've got to say Last Christmas I thought was pretty good. The Report I saw. Now, I hadn't seen that last time. I think you did. The Adam Driver. That was pretty good. Charlie's Angels, the new reboot of that. Marriage Story was another movie I've seen, and let me tell you, it is one of the best movies I've seen in a long time. It really did affect me. The Irishman, but I'll leave that until the end because we both might want to talk about that one together. Also saw a movie called After the Wedding, which has almost been and gone since we last spoke. It came out 1 week and it was almost gone the next out of cinemas, and it's a wonder. Because it has Michelle Williams, Julianne Moore, Billy Crudup was in it, and it's a strong film, a really good drama, but no publicity, nothing driven behind it for people to go and see it, so it's just disappeared basically out of cinemas. And last but not least, I saw Dr. Sleep. Yep. Now, I've seen it twice now. You might have seen it too, I'm not sure, Matt, but let me tell you, it's kind of what it was what I didn't know I wanted. I didn't think I needed a sequel to The Shining, and I haven't read the book that it's based on, but to me it's a little bit of a cross-germination of both Stanley Kubrick and Stephen King, and I really, really enjoyed it. It's actually a better movie the second time because there's a lot happening and it gets a little confusing, but overall I thought Dr. Sleep was brilliant.
I saw Dr. Sleep at a Sydney screening and I also loved that film. Unfortunately, a dud at the box office, both here in Australia and overseas.
Sadly, it has been a flop, just as you said. Maybe it needed a different title. Dr. Sleep, I know, was the name of the book, but it does not say The Shining in the title at all. Maybe it just needed like a subtitle of Dr. Sleep and then The Shining Part 2 or something. I know that sounds generic, but more people would know what it was.
I mean, I loved the film as well, and you're exactly right. The director, Mike Flanagan, really took what Stephen King did with the literary source and what Stanley Kubrick did with the kind of the visual medium of the adaptation of The Shining. And I don't know if you know this, but Stephen King really hates The Shining film. He actually despises what Kubrick did with it. But a lot of people remember that film because it's a fantastic movie. And I think that Dr. Sleep is also a fantastic film. Ewan McGregor is excellent. I thought that actually Rebecca Ferguson was absolutely terrific in the villain role. It's one of those kind of like horror movies where you're exactly right. There's a lot of elements going on. And I think a lot of that just comes from Stephen King's writing. He usually does have a lot of subplots and things going on, and there's a lot of world building. But I was just engrossed by it all the way through. And also, I think what else is really interesting about that movie is that, I watch a lot of horror films. I get a lot of them sent to me, and horror movies by their nature really have a sinister streak towards them. This film it's going to sound kind of weird saying this, Shane, but it's kind of almost like a positive story in it. It's about a man who is getting to grips with who he is, his abilities, his identity. He always becomes like a mentor figure to like a younger lady who also has these abilities as well, and they work together to kind of like combat evil. And I think like that type of storytelling, like especially the horror genre, is something that's been missing lately. A lot of horror films can be unrelentingly dark sometimes, and they really kind of relish in it. And this movie, it can get very dark, it can get very violent, it can get very scary, but it's got that kind of positive aspect to it. And I don't know whether that's a Stephen King thing where he wanted to he's just getting older at age and he's been through a few things, and whether he just want to put that spin on it. But that's just something that I took away from it. I don't know if you felt the same way, Shane.
Yeah, no, I did. I would object a little bit calling it a horror movie, even though it comes from The Shining. Originally, it's Doctor Sleep isn't that horrific. It's tense and it's more of a thriller and suspense movie. And you're right, it is about redemption and the main character finding himself again. And I think Rebecca. What was her last name?
Rebecca
Ferguson.
Yes.
She's terrific. Like, you're right. She's terrific, but odd. And second viewing, a little bit more understandable of what her and a group that she's in are trying to do. Because it's complicated. And maybe I needed to read the book, although I don't think it is word for word from the book either. It does pick elements out of the Kubrick incarnation into the book, which kept, I believe, Stephen King happy. He basically loves and endorses Dr. Sleep, which is great because he's had a good run, this year with lots of his adaptations. Probably since It Part 1, actually, he's had a really good run. So. Although I'm not sure about Pet Sematary, and that has been the biggest Stephen King blockbuster of the year. But that said, I did like Doctor Sleep, and you're right. I just wouldn't call it a horror movie, even though it's from that element.
Of the other movies you listed, Ford versus Ferrari, I saw as well. I thought it was fantastic. Both Christian Bale, Matt Damon, excellent in their roles. Really kind of sleek, stylish movie, more than a racing car film. I thought Tracy Letts was also very strong as Henry Ford II. I thought he was really terrific. And
we'll talk about that because we are obviously
okay.
We'll be bringing up some actors later, and he might get a mention because I'm with you on that. I don't think it was an actual car movie. There was a lot more to it than that.
I also saw Terminator Dark Fate, which I wasn't a fan of. I thought this is the sixth film in this franchise, and in my opinion, after number 2, it's just been a retread, really. I think the only one that's been kind of interesting is Terminator Salvation. That's the one where Christian Bale played John Connor. So it's like it was set in the future. It's kind of different. It wasn't so much a pursuit movie. This film is just like all the others, but it's just not as exciting as the other ones. I thought Genesis was a really low. It's still the worst movie in the franchise, but Dark Fate isn't far from that. Last Christmas I also saw, I'm kind of with you in regards to, it's a Christmas movie. For the whole point of Christmas movies, especially rom-com style Christmas movies, it has to be sweet, it has to be fluffy. I mean, it's of more of a British mold, even though Paul Feig's an American director. He did Bridesmaids and such. He did an okay job in it, and I really thought that what's the lead actress's name again?
I really like her, Emilia Clarke.
Yes.
I mean, you've got to give it. You've actually got to give the movie, and I think you'll agree, about 10 or 15 minutes because the comedy at the start just doesn't work. It falls flat, but it picks up, and rom-com and Christmas aficionados, I think, will get the most benefit out of it.
And she's like, when you see her on like talk shows and such, talking about Game of Thrones and other kind of more serious fare that she did, she really comes across that personality that she has in Last Christmas. It seems more her kind of natural personality, kind of kooky, kind of cheeky, likes to laugh at herself at the expense of herself. So I thought that really came across. The problem I had with that film, though, and I tweeted about it right after I saw the film because it really like got me a little worked up in it, is that Emma Thompson wrote the movie. She wrote the main characters as immigrants from Croatia. But throughout the film, just the way that they are portrayed, the way that they're described, the way that they, describe themselves, any Croatian person who sees that film will be scoffing at it. And I was definitely there as well. And it's a real shame because Emma Thompson is very clear in the screenplay in the movie. She puts great pain into showing the film of diversity. A lot of the characters in the movie come from all walks of life. And it's just a real shame that the main character that she has, she couldn't put in that little extra research to really depict them in a more truthful light. That really kind of, I hate to be a Grinch with the Christmas movie, but that really kind of put me off what that film was doing. But other than that, the tone of the film was just fine, exactly what you want from a film like that. And also The Irishman, I saw that as well, but I think you and I will be talking about that quite a bit a little later in our conversation. Yes. Let's move on to some news now. So we have a host, not for the Oscars though, but for the Golden Globes. So Ricky Gervais, he has been reported in Deadline. He's been pressed into service once again and will host the 77th annual Golden Globes next year. And to put in Gervais' words, they made him an offer he couldn't refuse. So this will be his 5th time, but he assures it will be his last time as well. And I find this really kind of peculiar because, as we saw with the Oscars last year, it's clearly seems that a lot of the awards bodies are trying to stay away from comics of Gervais kind of mold, very much kind of offense comedians. So it's going to be very interesting to see what's going to happen when January 5 comes around and it's Golden Globes time and Ricky Gervais on the stage. I know when you shared the news with me, Shane, you were very excited about this news.
I was excited, and it was like I woke up to the news and I thought, shit, I've got to text Matt because it's something that we talk about all the time, especially recently with hosts. And Ricky as host is exactly what they need. And if they get some controversy out of it, and if that happens, well, that might be welcomed because ratings are important. Yep. People like us love our movies and love our award shows, but not everyone does. And, ratings are important, so it might actually prompt people to watch it. Down the track in years to come, we might not see award shows like this on television. They might be just restricted to online streaming or something. So Ricky to say it's his last one too, and I think it was great that he admitted it was an offer he couldn't refuse. Obviously, they've thrown stacks of money at him, and he'll do a good job. Of course he will. On the run, he's funny, and when he prepped and reads scripts, he's funny. But I just think it'll work. It'll just work, and it might actually make the Oscars think twice about going hostless again this year.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I mean, if he gets ratings in, and his type of humor works, I like to think that the Oscars will look at it and just get over themselves and just try to get a host and just stop thinking about what everyone else like. The whole thing with the Kevin Hart situation, I hate to just go back on it again because it seems like we covered it so many times already.
We're backtracking.
We are
about Kevin.
We are, but the whole thing about that is that a lot of the people who were making a fuss of it were just like these kind of Twitter kind of activist kind of people were making a big stink of it. And all I got to say is that, if they went ahead with the show, what impact would it have by having a bunch of people on Twitter just go crazy about it? I mean, I don't think it would whatsoever. If you put on a good show and people like it at the end of the day, then that's all that matters. Ricky Gervais has proven 4 times already that he can do that. I'm sure he's going to do that again, and hopefully that will set the tone for the rest of award season for these other awards bodies to just get over themselves, get a host, liven up the experience of watching these how long does the Oscars go for? 3+ hours?
Generally 3 hours is your average, but some are longer, some are shorter. I think last year was one of the shortest.
Speaking of 3+ hours, let's talk a little bit Avengers End Game. So when we were, not our last podcast, but the one beforehand, where we talked about films that were released so far this year, I mentioned Endgame, and I talked about how Disney are going to put a lot of their resources behind trying to get a nomination for it. Now, at that time, Robert Downey Jr. said he didn't want any type of do any type of campaigning whatsoever for his role of Tony Stark, and a lot of the Marvel fans, and as you and I know, just watching the Martin Scorsese versus Marvel fans kerfuffle over the last 2 weeks, they're very passionate about their films. They got really upset about it, and they really kind of pushed Disney to go ahead and submit him for consideration for supporting actor. But they didn't stop there. They pretty much put every single person in this movie, and lest you forget, there's like 30 people in this film, and they got them all up there for consideration for best supporting actor. Look, I don't think that outside of Robert Downey Jr., that anyone else in this cast has got a shot in here of getting this Oscar nomination for this movie. But what's really interesting is that, don't forget, the last SAG award, Black Panther won Best Ensemble. So, do you think it could be a possibility that the lightning strikes again in another Marvel movie, considering the names involved and the popularity of the film, that it could happen again, Shane?
Right. Well, firstly, I'll just answer the ensemble thing. I think it'll have competition this year because Avengers should get that nomination from SAG. We'll talk about that in future episodes, but we've got Knives Out as well. Yep. Now, I haven't seen it yet, but that's a big ensemble, just alone. So I would say that's going to be a pretty big competition for something like, which will be interesting because they're totally different films. But that be that as it may, I wasn't surprised when you sent me that message and the email regarding this whole push forward for the Avengers End Game to be considered. And that's fair enough. They've got the money to do it. They got publicity. They can send out some of their actors to shake hands with people who are voters. Downey Jr., he's one of the greats. Like, he's 40 years of acting. I could handpick 10 movies just off the top of my head where he is borderline Oscar worthy, and he's been nominated twice before already. I think it'll connect with voters more on score and costume and effects and editing, of course, but maybe, just maybe, the cynical Academy of voters will vote for both Avengers and The Irishman to have them up against each other. And again, we're talking ratings. That is going to gain interest in ratings when that happens. And one last thing, if any, out of all the other people that you are nominated and in with a chance, Karen Gillan should be properly considered as Nebula because she's good. She's really strong and good and plays two characters in this movie, Endgame. So that's my choice if there was a left field one. Good on Downey Jr. being in the mix, but I think he said himself he didn't want to be, and I'm sorry to say he's not going to get there. Maybe a Golden Globe nom, because anything can happen there, but when it comes to Oscars, no, I don't think so.
See, the Irishman versus Avengers thing, I brought that up in our last podcast as well. And it's interesting.
You did, that's right.
All this stuff that's happening with Martin Scorsese and Marvel movies and all that, I think it could very much play out on the award circuit. And you mentioned before Knives Out being a potential ensemble cast nominee.
For sure.
But The Irishman, De Niro, Pacino, Pesci, Keitel, all these actors in that as well, that could be another one as well. So there could be a possibility that this kind of feud that's happening, if you can call it that. I mean, look, Marvel is huge. Marvel's made billions of dollars. Martin Scorsese is Martin Scorsese. I mean, let's just call it as it is. He's been around, since '69 making movies. He's made the biggest, most cultural, impactful movies of all time. He's brought forth performances and scenes, and has behind the scenes as well, has been had his hand in the preservation of cinema and has championed filmmakers and all these other things. He's like an institution into his own. So I don't really think there's much of a fight there whatsoever, because Marvel, for all the impact that it's had right now, I think that impact will be fleeting. And I think Scorsese is forever. I mean, if I could use a phrase like that. But it will be interesting to see. I mean, who knows? Who knows whether if Downey Jr. does decide to get behind it, and he's a very charming guy, he's great with the media. If he gets out there, he does a campaign trail. Just say the Avengers re-release once again on the big screen, just to get some more dollars into
the third time.
For the third time, more dollars in for like as an Academy run. I don't know. It could happen, and I guess we just have to wait and see if it does. Now, you know, the great thing about Oscar season sometimes, Shane, is that it brings out some real kind of wild stories, and we got the first of the season so far. So you and I spoke a little bit off air about this. There's this film called The Fanatic that came out, I think it was August, directed by Fred Durst, stars John Travolta, and he plays a character. It's not said whether he is, but it's implied that he's got his autism, of a higher spectrum of autism, and he is obsessed with movies, and he's obsessed with a movie star, and he stalks the movie star, and the movie turns to this thing about violence and etc. Anyway, so when the film came out, everyone panned it, and it was almost like ready to serve just for like people to dive in and just cut it up, because you've seen the pictures of John Travolta, right, with the shorts and the shirt and just his look and everything else.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was saying to you off air. That is pretty much the only thing I know about this movie. You filled me in on the other stuff that you're just telling us about now. So yeah, I was unaware it was even released, and you've seen it.
I've seen it. I reviewed it. It wasn't that bad. It wasn't that good, but it wasn't that bad. Travolta actually, I felt, gave a pretty good performance in the movie. It's one of those kind of swing big or go home kind of movie performances. He really just puts it out there. He didn't hit a home run necessarily. He got on maybe second base, and I think that's good enough for a movie like that. And just the truth be told, I got a real kind of soft spot for John Travolta. He's one of those movie stars I grew up with. I used to watch Grease and Saturday Night Live and Urban Cowboy, and later in my teen years it was Pulp Fiction.
Get Shorty is one of my favourite movies.
So he's for all the like grief that he gets, this guy was like a movie star, and he's given great performances, just as much as the bad ones. But it is really interesting that whoever the studio is behind this movie decided to try to get Oscar nomination or campaign in any kind of way to try to get John Travolta nominated for this movie, because it ain't gonna happen. No way, no how. And just the fact that it's out there and they're trying to do it, God bless them. They gave it a good college try, but I don't think it does anything for John Travolta right now. I'm sure he's kind of, if he hasn't done it by now, I'm sure he has to look at what type of choices he's making in regards to his career. He really needs to make another comeback on top of the comeback, because it's not going too well for him, and I cannot foresee any type of nomination coming his way, except for the good old Razzies, which will be out around the same time as the Oscars as well.
Yeah, well, there's been talk of Face Off 2 reuniting Nicolas Cage and John Travolta for quite some time now. I don't know if John Woo was going to be involved, but that's been in the mix for a while, I've heard. And just back to Fred Durst, I mean, he would have met John Travolta on the set of Be Cool, because Fred Durst was in Be Cool, which is the sequel to one of my favourite John Travolta movies, Get Shorty.
Yep.
So they must have established some sort of friendship there, and obviously now he's directed him in a film. But yeah, other than the image of the costume that he's wearing, I knew nothing of the movie. So you've intrigued me. I want to see it, but it doesn't sound like he is actually a real contender for any kind of awards.
Do me a favour, if it comes out here on DVD and you get a chance to watch it or stream and what have you, I would like you to watch it, and I want you to share with us on a future episode about what you think about it. We need to circle back to this, because
that's a challenge I'll take.
I'm really intrigued to see what your opinion is on that. Okay, so we covered the news, we covered what we watched. Now let's get on to predictions. That's the reason why people come here and why they want to listen. This week, we are doing the Best Supporting Actor category. And this category usually has some of the best performances of the year, I find. And this year, so far, from what I've seen and what I project is going to come out later in the year. I think it's going to be another kind of bountiful kind of collection of talent here. So Shane, how about you go first and talk about what the performance you think will be nominated for this category?
Well, let's get this out of the way first, because let's talk about The Irishman. Now, I'm going to go with Joe Pesci because he is fantastic in this. Now, don't get me wrong, Al Pacino's good too, and I'm sure he is pretty much a supporting actor as well. But Joe Pesci in this, the return for him, I know he's been in the odd movie, but this is a real return to form and just presence on screen, and he's outstanding in this film. I mean, among a whole group of established actors in top-notch mode. But Joe Pesci, for me, I could not take my eyes off him during The Irishman, and that was through the entire... it goes backwards and forwards in time, so you're seeing different Joe Pescis in it. But I'm sure you'll elaborate more because I know you're strong on this film. But to me, he's can't not be nominated. That's my opinion anyway.
So he's a one-time winner for Goodfellas. Like you said, hasn't appeared on screen that often. The last thing he did was, I think it was a film back in 2012 called Love Ranch with Helen Mirren. I don't know if you remember that film. So it's been that long, and it took Martin Scorsese quite a bit actually to coax him out of his kind of like retirement and do this movie. And he's fantastic in the film. He plays Russell Bufalino. He's like Philadelphia Mafia kind of not a don, but like very high kind of captain. What's really interesting about his performance in this movie is that, especially in Scorsese movies, we're used to the Joe Pesci that's really kind of loud and violent and aggressive, and this one's a very kind of measured, low-key kind of performance. I don't remember anywhere in a movie where he really kind of raises his voice or does that kind of like that kind of typical Joe Pesci irate thing, and it's really kind of fantastic the way he does it. It's almost kind of intoxicating the way that he played this role, didn't you think? Yeah, exactly. Intoxicating is a really good word for it. And I mean, overall, I was not enamored by The Irishman as many other critics were. Don't get me wrong, I didn't dislike it, but I didn't like gush and fall in love with it immediately. But that said, just different individual performances did move me, and it was great to see Joe back on stage, on screen. And I think my memory of him a lot, other than Goodfellas and the more serious roles, were his comedies, My Cousin Vinny and The Super and Home Alone. You know, like I was speaking to someone the other day, considerably younger than I, but the only movie he knew of Joe Pesci was Home Alone. And it's crazy because it's just so different to what other people are talking about. You know, they always bring up Goodfellas, and that's great. But I just think he's terrific in this. Understated and, not going over the top, but he didn't need to. He's in control. When he's sitting in some of those scenes where he's sitting at the table and just, like, talking and moving his hands around, he's in control, and that is really solid acting. Don't forget as well the Lethal Weapon movies was really good in those ones.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, no, I forgot about them. I don't think they ever won Oscars, but you know, he's entertaining in those.
He definitely was, with the blonde hair and all that stuff. Yeah. So let's stick with The Irishman. I'm going to counter your Joe Pesci with my Al Pacino. So he plays the role of Jimmy Hoffa in the movie, and it's a pivotal role because the basis of the film, the whole 3-hour basis of the film, to me, it's a movie about loyalty. So you got Robert De Niro's character, Frank Sheeran. He's a hitman for the Philadelphia mob. He works for Joe Pesci's character, but he's also good friends with Jimmy Hoffa, played by Al Pacino's character. And it's almost like this guy is like towing the line between these two different forces. You have Joe Pesci. We talked about him already. We talked about how he's a quiet, unassuming guy, has a lot of power. But then you talk about Al Pacino, and he plays Jimmy Hoffa. Jimmy Hoffa, the firebrand Teamsters leader, the head of the union, always in front of the camera. I think the line in the movie was in the 50s he was as big as Elvis, in the 60s he was as big as the Beatles. I mean, he was like the man. And Pacino, whenever he appears on screen, is just electric. I mean, a lot of people talk about Al Pacino's acting style, which really kind of came out, like the really kind of big, kind of bombastic kind of Al Pacino. They really kind of came out in the late 80s, early 90s. His early kind of 70s stuff, a lot of that was kind of like more a little more subdued. He did those Godfather movies and films with Sidney Lumet and etc. But this is like that the later day Pacino at its very best. Interestingly enough, it's his first movie with Martin Scorsese. They never worked with each other before, and he just knocks it out the park. Every time he's on the screen, he just crackles with electricity. I mean, he's just so good in this movie. Interestingly enough, he's a one-time Oscar winner for Scent of a Woman, and that was the last time he received a nomination back in 1993. He was actually nominated twice that year. For Scent of a Woman and Glenn Ross. So he's one of the few to get like a double nominee. Since then, he's given great performances, but he's won a whole lot of Emmys and a whole lot of Golden Globes, but no Oscar nomination. So I predict that not only will Pacino be nominated, but he could be like a front runner for winning as well. I think his performance is that strong. His iconic status as a legend legend actor is going to help some way as well. And look, whether it's Pacino, whether it's Pesci, whether it's both, it would be really cool if both get nominated. I reckon one or two is definitely going to get nominated there, because The Irishman I am a big fan of. It's already jumped up to my favourite film of the year so far. And I think a slew of award nominations are going to go its way, and those two actors in particular, if not both of them, definitely one of them will get nominated this upcoming Academy Awards.
Let me just say quickly on Al Pacino. I mean, yeah, he hasn't been nominated, but he kind of... I was surprised when you said he hadn't been nominated for Donnie Brasco. No. I actually thought he had, but because he's so good in that, and The Insider, and he's done some great films. But he also went off off the rails a bit with like Jiggly and Jack and Jill. Yeah. Like no actor, no matter what their status, Matt, is immune to rubbish.
No, of course not.
Obviously.
And this is a film that stars Robert De Niro as well. He had Rocky and Bullwinkle and all those kind of films. I think it's just something that happens with these some of these actors, especially like I think Dustin Hoffman is not so much, and Jack Nicholson is very picky. But there's a lot of actors that when it hits that age range, they try to take whatever performance they can. Sometimes it falters. Sometimes it's just really mind-boggling. Like Jack and Jill was just he plays himself in that movie, right? So it's just almost like a parody kind of performance.
I'm against Adam Sandler movies basically, as it is, most of them.
I hear you.
And Jack, you just brought up Jack Nicholson. He played Hoffa in a movie called Hoffa.
That's right.
And I was like, understandably, kind of comparing that performance, which I have not seen for a long time, but I know I've seen Hoffa, which had Danny DeVito, and I think directed by Danny DeVito. Back in the 90s. Yeah. But yeah, that's the only exposure I've ever had to Jimmy Hoffa in movies that I can remember. This, The Irishman, and then back in the day for Hoffa. So I agree. I think he's quite substantial in it, but if they're only picking one, I would go with Joe Pesci.
I'd go with Al, but I'll be happy with either one, to tell you the truth. Shane, what's next on your list?
Well, we were talking about this movie also previously earlier in the podcast, Ford versus Ferrari, and Tracy Letts as Henry Ford II, as they say a few times in the movie. He's out of control. He's really good. Like I was very surprised how well he acted in this. I mean, he has a moment in the trailer where he breaks down and cries after Matt Damon's character takes him on a test run in the car, but there's a lot more to it than that. And there's some great acting here in this movie, including Christian Bale. I mean, he's one of my favourites anyway. But Tracy Letts, I thought I would mention, because he's a face that you've seen in a lot of movies, but I got to be honest, I hadn't known his name until now.
He's a really interesting guy, Tracy Letts. Not only an actor, and a lot of people will remember him playing Saoirse Ronan's dad in Lady Bird. He's also,
of course,
he's also quite an accomplished screenwriter, especially on the stage. August Osage County. I don't know if you remember that film with Julia Roberts, Hugh McGregor.
I love that. Yeah, that's a really strong movie that didn't do well at the box office, but it's got some great actors, and yeah, I do remember it.
Well, he wrote the screenplay and the play as well. He wrote that. And and I don't know if you remember two William Friedkin films, one called Bug with Ashley Judd, and another one called Killer Joe with Matthew McConaughey. He wrote those two films as well, both the plays and the movies. So he's like a very interesting guy. He's really kind of solidified himself lately, though, as this character actor. Like you said, one of those faces, you know it, you don't really know who it is. And I think this performance just might be the performance to really break through and get him a nomination. I do think he was really strong in this movie. And just playing the character, a person like Henry Ford II, big auto industry magnate, driven by his ego, all the power in the world and all the money to back it up as well, doing whatever it takes to win this kind of like battle of egos up against Enzo Ferrari. He was just terrific in it, and every time he appears on screen, he's always entertaining as well. Even when he doesn't say anything, in his very kind of he just has those eyes that just kind of stare, can like really burn a hole through you. He's terrific in that, and you mentioned that scene as well in the trailer where he bursts out weeping after Matt Damon gives him a little run around the circuit in a very kind of fast, extreme way. There's even more to that in the movie. Like there's a bit of almost like a monologue, dialogue thing happening there as well. So and he's just terrific at that too. So I back what you say there with Tracy Letts. He's really terrific in that film, and I don't know. Let's see what happens, because I don't think that Matt Damon and Christian Bale really are going to really kind of puncture what I think is going to be like the top 5 or 6 names for lead actor. Yeah. But I think Tracy Letts could have a chance to really get in that supporting actor category.
Yeah, well, I was thinking of putting Christian Bale in the mix, but he and Matt are more of the lead to me. Yeah. And I really wanted to mention Tracy Letts to you, and you've just enlightened me. I mean, I didn't know about August Osage County and his other stage writing and that, so I'm just really glad, and I hope that he gets recognised for this, because he has great monologues, as you mentioned, with just about everyone he comes in contact with in this film, and the eyes have it, and he's not a conventional good-looking actor or anything like that. He has presence, though, and I would love to see him nominated for a supporting actor.
I would as well. I'm going to move on to my next pick, and to me so far this is the front runner in the category, and that's Brad Pitt in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He's a 3-time nominee. He's actually an Oscar winner as a producer for 12 Years a Slave. He has that Plan B studio that he does a lot of films with. Just off the top of my head, I think... I can't even think of it now. I think Vice was one of them, and I'm not 100%. Big Short was...
Well, he previously produced The King.
He did that as well? Yeah,
he did.
Big Short, Moneyball, he produced that as well. He also got nominated as an actor in that movie. So he's like in front of the screen, behind the screen, a really kind of, of course, talented actor. And I think this performance in particular, as Cliff Booth, stuntman in Quentin Tarantino's latest movie, is one of his best performances. And you could say that it is it is 100%. Let's just face the facts. It's a co-lead performance. It is. Both DiCaprio and Pitt have equal screen time. Brad Pitt isn't so much a supporting actor, but category-wise, and there is kind of like a lot of category play when it comes to award season, and a lot of lead performances get slotted into supporting performances, because in this case they want DiCaprio to get that lead nomination. I think Brad Pitt is going to go for supporting actor. He said he's not going to campaign for it, but I think when push comes to shove, he is going to be out there and do some stuff. I mean, I've already seen him out there talking with, doing interviews with other actors and such, and talking about the movie. So he's kind of going against his word already. But I think he's just terrific in his movie. He's funny. He portrays kind of like almost like a man's man character, but a good man as well. It's not like some testosterone-driven thug. It's a guy with good sensibilities and a good heart towards him, and a very compelling actor as well. And the last half hour of the film, when you just see him kind of let loose upon Charles Manson's minions, I think is just fantastic kind of physical comedic aspect to his performance as well. And I think he's overdue for a win. There's been a bunch of performances that he's been nominated for that he could have got a win for, but hasn't got there yet. And I think this movie in particular, and Tarantino does have a Midas touch with supporting players and getting them nominations and getting them wins, could possibly his first win as an actor. And if it's if that's the case, Dan, it's deservedly so.
Yeah, well, he's on my list as well. So I agree with everything you just said. But what you were saying about not campaigning, I mean, one, he probably doesn't need to because it's a movie that I would suggest is going to be in the minds of voters anyway. And it's about to come out on Blu-ray and DVD. And there was an extended version released in US cinemas recently. Yep. So it's on people's minds. He is a legend. Like, he's obviously a great-looking bloke and a true movie star, you know. But his career is all over the place. It's independents to blockbusters to, you know, it's really, really good and impressive. And from a very young age, he had the it factor. And in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I think we talked about it in previous episodes of Talking Oscars this year, that it's a great movie. Like, it's a movie about movies and history and Tarantino, and it's just got everything going for it. And he's great. Like, he's just so good. And that scene, I'll bring it up again, where he goes to that old western town after giving the hippie girl a lift, Margaret Qualley, and then goes through the whole Bruce Dern and then coming out of the shed. And, you know, if you haven't seen it, I won't spoil it too much more, but it is extraordinary in filmmaking, in music, in acting, in cinematography, and just everything. So yep. Brad Pitt has to be nominated, and yes, he was on my list as well.
Great pick there. Well, who else is on your list, Shane? Who's next on your pick for supporting actor?
Well, I've got two left fields here, and this is the first one. Jamie Bell for Rocket Man.
Interesting.
Now,
okay.
Everyone's talking about Taron Egerton, and he's amazing as Elton John, of course. But Jamie Bell was just as impressive.
Yeah.
As his friend and song co-writer, and it was a really good performance. And I remember seeing that at the premiere, and people around me, when he appeared on screen, forgot. They go, "Oh, that's Jamie Bell." Like, they kind of like were startled by his presence, and then we're talking about him afterwards because he had such an impact. I really like him in Rocket Man. I think Rocket Man, I hope, hasn't been forgotten because it was released earlier in the year, and that happens to, you know, be the case sometimes when it comes to movies that get released rather than earlier in the year. But Jamie Bell is is one of my long shots to be nominated as a supporting actor.
So he is a BAFTA winner for, of course, his role in Billy Elliot. He also got nominated.
One of the great movies.
Yeah, well, sure is. And only a couple of years ago, he got nominated for Film Stars Don't Die in Liverpool. I don't know if you've ever seen that with him.
Oh, I did, with Annette Bening.
Yeah,
I did see that. But it was kind of forgettable. It wasn't bad, but it was a forgettable film.
So in Rocket Man, he plays the role of Bernie Taupin, who was pretty much the lyricist for Elton John, wrote lyrics for all of his big kind of big hits. And like, I know exactly what you're saying. I mean, Taron Egerton's, of course, he's playing Elton John, so he's playing a personality that's big and he's loud and he's proud and he sings and he dances and all this stuff. And Jamie Bell he does maybe a little bit of that as well, because of course the movie kind of delves into these kind of big musical, fantastical sequences.
Fantasy, yeah.
But he just, his presence, it kind of gives the film a grounding. It definitely gives the Elton John character a grounding as well. It gives him like a shoulder to lean on. It gives him a confidence as well. So I think he's just fantastic in the role as well. And it's definitely one of those things where you leave that movie thinking about Taron Egerton and all that stuff as well. But Jamie Bell definitely does stick on your mind. So I think that's a really good kind of pick there, Shane, because I would have thought of myself, if he doesn't get Oscars consideration, I like to think that maybe BAFTAs will be something of a lock for him, wouldn't you?
Oh, BAFTAs is a lock. Yeah, being British, of course. And BAFTAs are a little bit outside the box. I think that Rocket Man will get a lot of love from the BAFTAs, for sure.
My next pick is for a movie that we haven't seen yet, and I have no idea when it's coming out here in Australia as well, by the way, which really sucks because it's getting great reviews in the States. I'm talking about Willem Dafoe in The Lighthouse.
Yes, I can't wait to see this.
So Robert Eggers, this is his second film. He did a film called The Witch, or what some people call The Vitch because of the way that the spelling of the cover, which is just one of those silly things. And he plays the role of a lighthouse keeper alongside Robert Pattinson. The character's name that Willem Dafoe plays is Thomas Wake, and I don't know if you've seen the trailers and some clips from this movie, but it sounds like kind of like a pirate kind of voice to him. From what I've read in the movie, he's just simply fantastic in it. He's been nominated 4 times previously. Twice in recent years actually. He had At Eternity's Gates, when he played Van Gogh, and then he had Florida Project as well. So I don't know whether he's going to win, but I think this is a performance, from what I've read, that's interesting and entertaining enough in that really unique Willem Dafoe kind of way, that it's going to almost get him another nomination here, which would be number 5. I just have a feeling that an actor like Willem Dafoe is going to go the way of Peter O'Toole and go his whole life, get nominated and not get a win. And it's not because he's not a terrific actor, it's not because he doesn't give terrific performances, but the movies that he does are kind of like really kind of eccentric, under the radar kind of films that can get you that nomination but can't get you over the hump to get the win. That's where the Brad Pitts and the Mike Rylances and etc. They're the ones who get those kind of performances and wins instead. So I think Willem Dafoe is going to get another nomination here. I can't wait to watch this movie because the trailers look fantastic. The early reviews look great as well. Shot in black and white. I love The Witch. I love what happened there, and I love watching Willem Dafoe be really unconventional and really kind of unkempt as well. And this movie definitely shows both sides of him in it.
Yeah, I have not seen the trailers, so I'm not sure how he speaks like a pirate, but only because The Witch, I knew nothing about that either. I hadn't seen the trailer, and it was just pulsating. So I'm expecting a lot from what I hear from the festivals that it has played at overseas and by other critics. So looking forward to The Lighthouse. And yeah, Willem Dafoe, I mean, The Last Temptation of Christ. I mean, how and Platoon, and it just goes on and on. So I loved the Florida Project. I actually thought he would really win that year, and I don't think he lost by much. So let's hope so, Matt, and I look forward to watching it.
What's next on your list, Shane?
Well, this is my I've got an honourable mention, but I'm going to mention this one as another long shot alongside Jamie Bell for Rocketman, and that's Samuel L. Jackson for The Banker. Okay. Now, I brought this movie up with you last time, and you were like impressed that I even knew about it, because I do like to go a bit off sometimes the radar, and it hasn't yet been released. It's got Nicolas Hoult and Samuel Jackson and Taylor Black in it, like I was talking about last time. But seriously, it has everything going for it. And from what I can see in the trailer, which has been released since we last talked, I think, Samuel Jackson's going to be a bit of a long shot, but, I think he might get considered for some kind of supporting role in this.
Stars Anthony Mackie as well, directed by George Nolfi, who did The Adjustment Bureau. Yeah, I remember actually talking about this film last time with you as well. Samuel Jackson's one of those kind of interesting kind of actors. I mean, we'll talk about Willem Dafoe before and the different kind of, all the different type of performances he does. And Samuel Jackson's kind of similar. He can do like these kind of indie films and kind of eccentric fare as well, but then he's got those kind of Tarantino films and Marvel movies that kind of fall back on as well. I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens when this film comes out, whether it's going to have an impact. There's a few films like it hasn't even, like no one's seen yet. I mean, that's one of them. What's the other one? There's that Richard Jewell, the Clint Eastwood movie as well. That's another one no one's seen yet.
And Bombshell.
There we go, Bombshell as well. I mean, there's all these films that people haven't seen yet that still have the possibility to make an impact on the awards race, and I think The Banker could definitely be one of them. I'm just going to move on now and just talk about a couple other potential nominees. And I'm going to go through them quickly because I haven't seen the films, but I think that there's potential there for Oscar nominees here. The first one is Tom Hanks for A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. So he plays the role of Fred Rogers, with, of course, there was that TV show in the States for such a long time, and in the role of Mr. Fred Rogers was such a warming presence on the screen, and you can't think of a better actor than Tom Hanks to portray a character like that. So he's a 2-time winner, but the last time he was nominated was back in 2001 for Castaway, which is kind of crazy to me, because you got to think about, since that time, so many great performances he did. You have Captain Phillips. What's the one with Sully, the Clint Eastwood film about
well, Sully was incredible, and I love that. But I think we may have spoken about this before, if not on air, off air, and that's how did he not get nominated for Captain Phillips?
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, it was such an epic, incredible, emotional role, and yeah, I'm very surprised he did not get nominated for that.
I mean, it's just one of those things, right? Like, it's almost like the kind of like the Pacino thing we were talking about beforehand. So like a decade or plus of great performances, but it almost feels like sometimes that certain actors get the awards, maybe 1 or 2 awards, and then after that, the Academy kind of says, you know what, you've been honoured enough. We're going to try to look at some other people. I mean, the exception to that is someone like Meryl Streep, who gets nominated for everything. Like Meryl Streep can sneeze into a tissue paper on screen and get a nomination for supporting actress.
Well, you know, I will just hold you up on that, because as much as I love her, and I agree, she's a bit like Christian Bale and Julia Roberts. Whenever they're in a movie, you're interested, you want to see it. But Meryl Streep is in The Laundromat this year, and I'm not so sure she'll get nominated.
No, I don't think so.
I mean, I enjoyed it, but mate, I don't think she'll get nominated.
I mean, that I could have added that to what I've watched, but you know, there's a lot I didn't like in regards to that movie. Performances wise, it was okay. I mean, it's very much kind of like a Big Short kind of rip.
I liked it. I actually really was entertained and had a good laugh. But yeah, no awards. No awards.
But you know, there's another Netflix movie that's coming out soon that I think could possibly have a few awards coming its way. And it's a film called The Two Popes. So this is a very kind of interesting movie. So it's the nomination I'm talking about in particular for this category is Anthony Hopkins, who's playing the role of Pope Benedict. As a lot of people know, he was the head of the Catholic Church as sitting on the chair of St. Peter, and then he resigned from the position, which at that point Pope Francis, played by Jonathan Pryce, takes over. The director of the film is Fernando Mireles, and he did City of God and The Constant Gardener. This is a Netflix production. Early reviews have been really, really strong for this movie. And I think, I mean, Anthony Hopkins, we've mentioned before Tom Hanks and Al Pacino. The last time Anthony Hopkins was nominated for an Oscar was back in 1998 for Armistead. So it's almost been like 20 plus years since he got a nomination too. And I think this role in particular, I've seen a couple of the trailers so far, because being a Catholic myself, I'm very interested in the story and how it's going to be portrayed. Jonathan Pryce, I don't know if you've ever seen Jonathan Pryce and Pope Francis together. They're dead ringers. I mean, if I find out 10 years from now that Jonathan Pryce has been sitting in the St. Peter's in Rome, acting as the Pope for like a year or so Pope Francis can have some time off, I would not be shocked whatsoever, because they look exactly like one another. And Anthony Hopkins also bears a resemblance to the Pope Benedict as well. And from what I've seen of the trailer so far and early reviews, he really gives a really commanding performance, portraying a really interesting man. I mean, Pope Benedict, for all the flaws he had as the during his time in the papacy, he's a very interesting, intelligent man, very theological sound, and I think that Anthony Hopkins has that kind of has a cadence, has the intelligence to really pull off a role like that. And I wouldn't be surprised that finally, after how many years he didn't get a nomination, he does get a nomination for The Two Popes. We're going to find out soon, because just like Marriage Story and The Irishman, The Two Popes is a Netflix movie, so we're going to see it sooner or later. And I'm pretty sure that the Ritz, just like Irishman and Marriage Story, are going to be showing The Two Popes when it comes out early December. So they are. Yeah, so it's definitely a film I want to see, and I think that Anthony Hopkins definitely has a chance to get nominated for it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I know you are a Catholic, so you know a lot about this stuff. I would never have known that Jonathan Pryce was like a dead ringer for the Pope. So
you have no idea. I'm telling you. Look, when we're done here, get on Google, write down Jonathan Pryce, Pope Francis, and when both their images come up, you're going to be befuddled. You're going to be like, oh my God, how the hell does this happen? It's kind of like that kind of Tom Hardy, Logan Marshall Green kind of thing, where they look exactly the same. I'm telling you right now, Pope Francis and Jonathan Pryce look exactly the same. You couldn't think of anyone else but him to play this role. It's almost as if like God made him look like Pope Francis so he can play Pope Francis later in his career. I mean, it's that incredible. Look it up afterwards. Trust me.
You're not going to like this, but when I think of Jonathan Pryce, I mean, I think of, and we spoke about it earlier, Glengarry Glen Ross. Mm-hmm. He's in that.
Yep.
And a really early 80s movie from with Whoopi Goldberg called Jumpin' Jack Flash.
Oh, interesting.
He was in that as well, right at the end. Like, he's not a main character, he's right at the end. Very young in it. And, of course, he played a James Bond villain. And I'm a bit of a fan of the James Bond movies, so I'm very familiar with him in Tomorrow Never Dies.
Excellent.
So, yes. Jonathan Pryce, The Two Popes, I will look forward to watching it. But whether he's an Oscar nominee or not, I will let you know when I see it.
Excellent. Any other mentions you want to make for this category, Shane?
Yeah, 2 honourable mentions. We mentioned Bombshell before. John Lithgow is in it. Mm-hmm. Now, he plays Roger Ailes. It's a true story based on the Fox News network and all the bad things that were happening behind the scenes. Russell Crowe played Roger Ailes recently in The Loudest Voice, a television series, which I really, really enjoyed. It was a little bit difficult to watch, but it was a good series. But this one with Charlize Theron and Margot Robbie and Nicole Kidman and John Lithgow, in the trailer at least, he's not kind of unrecognisable, but Roger Ailes was a very heavy-set, big guy and with a distinct voice and character, and he looks like he'd be pretty effective in this. So I'm going to give him as an honourable mention, and I haven't seen it yet, but I'm looking forward to Bombshell. And my second honourable mention is Wesley Snipes in the Dolomite movie, which, I mean, Eddie Murphy I've got as a lock, I hope, as best actor. You never know. But, Wesley Snipes has not a lot to do, but it's good to see him. He was impressive. And I think, if anything, the Golden Globe Foreign Press will nominate him. We'll see about Oscars, but I really wanted to mention him as one of my picks.
I just want to put a really outside mention as well, and we spoke about it before, but I'm just so curious as to what's going to happen with the Robert Downey Jr. nomination or potential nomination for Avengers. It's really interesting to me because he was kind of like the first actor to sign on board, launched the whole thing with Iron Man back in 2008. Whether that in itself is going to give it enough juice to get a nomination, I don't think it will. But I'm just going to put it out there so in case it does happen, I can say I told you so. But I can put it on record. I don't think it will happen. I think like all the names that we've talked about already, that's a really, really strong assemblage of talent right there that could be potentially nominated. I can't see anyone being bumped for him and for his performance. If it does happen, I mean, it'll be quite spectacular because a lot of that I think is fan driven because as we mentioned in the news before, a lot of the fans said no, put him in consideration. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it will happen, but I'm just going to put it out there just in case it does, because I remember last Oscar season I spoke a lot about Black Panther and I was happy to see that come into fruition. So I'm going to talk. I think I might do the same Endgame as well, just because I don't know. It just seems to me that the different kind of face of the Academy is just kind of switching to take those films a little more seriously than they used to. So I'm just going to keep that out there, keep it afloat, just in case it does happen.
You keep it afloat, Matt. You're a friend, you're a colleague, and you're a dreamer.
I am.
It is not going to happen. If you're going to throw him in the mix, I'll throw Timothée Chalamet in the mix for Little Women, which I haven't seen yet. But there you go.
I actually got a screening of that coming up soon, so I'm going to be very interested to see.
I am looking forward to it as well. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So before we depart, Shane, how will you tell the people out there where they can find you online?
Well, if you want to read my reviews and reports on the red carpet and interviews and so forth, you can find me on social media at movie_analyst. So at movie_analyst on both Instagram and Twitter.
And for everyone listening, you can find Matt's movie reviews at www.mattsmoviereviews.net, also on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, pretty much everywhere, all over the web. I'm covering every base that you can imagine. So make sure you get online and check us both out. Shane A. Bassett, I thank you very much for joining me once again, and hopefully we get a chance to do this again next week, because we're going to start going into the lead categories, and who knows, maybe between now and next week we get a little more clearer picture as to what's happening campaign-wise for a lot of these movies.
I hope so. Yeah, I think we will. And you never know. There might be a movie that we haven't even mentioned yet that might go up a notch next time we speak.
Okay, Shane. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.